Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Good, good. Well, we are so excited to kick off this webinar series with Dr. Porter and myself. It has been quite the making of this, and we have put together some good information for you all that we are going to share. My name is Christy Keys, and I am the agronomy agent for Castro Hell and Lamb up in the Panhandle. And I just want to welcome you here. Sorry about the email confusion. If you maybe didn't receive a link, you received the advertisement. That was not intended whatsoever. But we have you here now, and it looks like we have a pretty good attendance. Just kind of want to remind everybody to mute yourself if you don't mind. We are recording this so that those that cannot make it today can listen to this on their own time. And we will have this recording ready for you, hopefully after this, and I will send you a link to that recording. Again, my name is Christy. If you have anything, please feel free to raise the hand, put it in the chat, and I will do my best to answer your questions. Dr. Porter?
Thank you, Christy, and I really appreciate you, first of all, working with me and being willing to do that, and also appreciate you sending out the information and promoting it. Did a great job. Christy is our Extension Agronomy agent, and she's doing a great job up at Castro, Hale, and Lamb counties, and so we really appreciate her work. And I am Dana Porter, Extension Program Leader in Biological and Agricultural Engineering in Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Service. So I'm based in Lubbock. Just the acknowledgements. The series is supported in part by the USDA ARS Ogallala Aquifer Program. More on that later, but we do have a project to deliver information to y'all, and I'm really excited to be able to work with Christy on this. It's also supported, of course, by USDA NIFA Hatch Act and the High Plains Underground Water Conservation District. So we really appreciate our supporters. Water issues for y'all in Extension. Water issues consistently rank among the top identified needs in the state. These are the top program interests of most of the counties in Texas. And since water is a high priority for Texas, it's also a high priority for Christy and me. So we're really excited to be able to bring this to you. We welcome you to ask questions. If you put something in the chat, I won't be able to see it, but Christy will keep up with that. And we really do appreciate your interest and participation. So this Ag Water Management series, we're going to address several water resources, information resources, agencies, who does what, crop water management, soil water management, irrigation technologies and practices. We'll be hitting the high points in this initial 5-part series, and then later, after planting, we'll take a deeper dive into some other issues. Much of this information will be presented in webinar series like this one. We're also later going to conduct some local workshops to do some more hands-on types of activities, individual activities, operation-specific exercises, and some field days with some hands-on experiences later. So we look forward to that as well. So it's going to happen over time. Obviously, the field days will make much more sense if we go into the growing season a little further. So we look forward to that. The series, the way we're kind of laying it out here is we're just going to cover those fundamentals to get started. Topics include, today we're going to be talking about soil plant and atmospheric relationships. We'll talk about soil water principles next week. We'll get into irrigation systems, aquifers, wells, that sort of thing next time. We're going to get it later on. Water conservation strategies, and then some other tools, technologies, and economic considerations. So we've tried to get a lot in here. Some special topics that we're proposing are listed here, and we welcome your feedback about things that you want to hear about more and what you want to talk about more. So the interactive workshops will be coming up later. We'll be talking about crop-specific management, more of the local needs activities there, and of course the technical tours. We're going to be talking about subsystem maintenance and safety, and looking at some irrigation research programs in the area. So we're excited about those too. So let's jump into the first session here with an overview of the ag water management issues. Again, feel free to raise questions. Christy is graciously watching that since I can't see them. And feel free to ask questions and correct us as needed. Agriculture is the largest water use sector in Texas. Probably not surprising to anyone on this call. Agricultural water uses comprise, and primarily agricultural irrigation comprises approximately 50% of the total water use in Texas and over 90% of the water use in the Texas High Plains. So we're kind of a big deal, right? Most important source of water for irrigation in the Texas High Plains is the Ogallala Aquifer. So we're going to be talking about that some more later. The Ogallala Aquifer is a mined aquifer, meaning that the rate of pumping exceeds the recharge. And so we have spatially variable decline within the aquifer. Probably also not surprising to most people on this call. Agricultural irrigation is economically important to the region, from the field and enterprise level to the community and regional levels. And so we want to, and it even affects global markets, especially since we're a really big cotton patch here. Some background information that I'm just going to grab right from this publication. Kevin Wagner, several years ago, with cooperation of several researchers and extension faculty in the area, put together this report, Status and Trends of Irrigated Agriculture in Texas. It's available free of charge from the Texas Water Resources Institute website, and it talks about practices, trends in agricultural irrigation, technologies and practice adoption by growers. It's really good, well put together resource. Taken straight from that document is this graphic, and it just presents the relative importance of irrigation water. The blue boxes are irrigation water volume. These are in millions of acre feet, and it's current as of 2010 estimates and projections to 2060. This is related to the Texas Water Development Board State Water Plan and the different regions. You can see under the bars, you'll see Region O, Region A. These are the regional water planning areas. And so you can see the relative importance of irrigation, particularly in the high plains, South Texas, out in West Texas, more so than the more urbanized areas over in East Texas. Why irrigate? And that's a question, we could save a lot of water if we didn't irrigate, but there's an economic reason to irrigate. Irrigation has enhanced both productivity and profitability of the agricultural sector. And so looking at the 2022 Census of Agriculture, farms with some form of irrigation accounted for more than 50% of the total U.S. crop sales, while irrigated land accounted for less than 17% of the harvested cropland. So we're getting a lot more yields, a lot more value for those irrigated crops. It improves, irrigation improves crop yields and quality, and therefore farm productivity. It also reduces risks by mitigating those effects of droughts. Again, probably not a big surprise to most people who are listening to this. Irrigation affects land values, local tax bases, local economies, and regional economies. So it is economically important to the area. So we start by looking, really we looked at, Christy and I talked about, where do we start? Do we start with the soils? Do we start with the crops? Where do we start? Let's start with the plant. Let's start with the crops. And so we're just kind of skim the surface of plant water use and these soil plant atmosphere relationships. We'll dig in deeper in future sessions. So if I look at this general graphic of soil plant water relationships, where does the water go? Okay, it comes from rainfall and irrigation. And then, so I've got water going into the soil from infiltration. If it rains harder and faster, or oops, sorry, my mouse is going crazy here. Water applied at a rate faster than the soil can take it in can run off. It's likely to run off, or it's going to puddle. Water that is applied deeper than or in excess to what the soil can hold, you could also have deep percolation and leaching, unless you have some kind of impeding layer. Water, wet surfaces, rainfall droplets, irrigation droplets, Wet leaves, wet surfaces, you've got evaporation losses from soil and water, wet surfaces, and then you've got transpiration. Now, transpiration is that water that is useful to the plant. It's taken up by the plants and used. So if I want to take I can also look, I want to add something in here. If I have a shallow aquifer, a shallow water table, I can also have interaction between the that water table and the vadose zone or the unsaturated zone. I don't usually talk about that, but in some areas you can have shallow water tables. Evapotranspiration is where we combine the terms of evaporation from those wet surfaces and transpiration, which is water that's moved up through the plant. So I take it up through the roots. The water it moves up through the xylem, and then it goes out through the stomata in the leaves, those little pores in the leaves. And so what transpiration is doing, it's got a couple of functions. It kind of acts like an evaporative cooler. As the water evaporates, it cools the plant. It also acts like a Venturi pump, if you think about it. So it's pulling up water and nutrients from the soil so the plant can use it. So we've got little Venturi pump going on. So that's kind of my generalized understanding of transpiration. And then Christy decided for us, we're not going to memorize the Krebs cycle and all that stuff again. We've already been through that. But there is a lot more information that you can look up in plant physiology documents, references, textbooks, a lot of good stuff out there. So how can we measure ET? How are we going to measure evapotranspiration? The true way to measure it is with a weighing lysimeter. Think about a large plant pot, right? So I'm weighing all the water that's going in onto the soil and going into the soil. I'm weighing everything that's coming off, and that's my evapotranspiration, actual mass balance. Okay, so not everybody has a weighing lysimeter, so I can estimate it with intensive soil moisture monitoring. So I know how much water is in the soil, how much water I put on, how much water is in there, and subtraction, miracle of math, I can get the evapotranspiration. There are also some indirect sensors, 80 covariance, other newer sensor technologies that we'll get into later, but there are ways to estimate ET. There's also even satellite-based systems that we can estimate ET. So there's how we're measuring it. Factors that affect ET, atmospheric. So a hot, dry, windy day, you're going to have more evapotranspiration expected than you would on a cool, foggy, rainy day, right? So your air temperature, humidity, the humidity of your air, wind, and solar radiation are going to affect it. Plant factors, the type of plant, the growth stage. So if I'm at seedling stage or a full canopy, there's going to be a difference, right, in plant water use. Plant density, leaf characters, different types of plants, different leaves will affect the transpiration. Plant water stress conditions, so that if the plant is not healthy, it's not using as much water. Canopy cover and crop health. Again, that goes into that crop health, how much water it will use. Soil factors, how much water is in the soil. I can't remove water that's not there, right? Soil temperature, surface cover, lots of factors there that we can talk about later, but these affect the evapotranspiration, crop water use. So when I want to estimate it, okay, y'all, the math is coming. I'm going to put a couple of definitions here for you. I have a reference crop evapotranspiration, and this is an estimate of water requirement for a well-watered reference crop. Most of the time, it's going to be a model or idealized cool season grass, a grass reference. We also call that short crop, or alfalfa or tall crop. So those are our primary reference crops. Again, they're not real crops, they're idealized, but that's what we apply the numbers to in the math. I'll show you in a minute. So this reference ET is going to be calculated by applying, I'm going to get the locally available climate data, the temperature, solar radiation, wind and humidity, put them into equation. Okay, I measure them from a local weather station. Here's a sample of one that's well cited. This is at the USDA Agricultural Research Service Laboratory at Bushland, Texas. Okay, so I put all those numbers into this math, and no, we're not going to make you calculate that, but just so you can see where those numbers are used, and it goes into a mathematical equation to estimate reference crop ET. And I provided a reference there. If you want to look at the recording, and I've got it later, there is a publication you can get. So I take that reference crop ET, multiply it by a crop specific, equation specific, location specific, and crop growth stage specific crop coefficient to get my crop ET. So it's going to be specific to all those conditions. And then I can look at how that looks if I plot it out. So here's an example of reference ET. The top line is a reference ET for a cool season grass. And I multiply it by a crop coefficient. So I've got a what the crop is more likely really using is the cool season grass, the middle line, or the warm season grass uses less. So I've got a reference ET, and then I've got some calculated with crop coefficient ETs. Fescue is the cool season grass I'm using here, and Bermuda grass is the warm season grass here. So you can just kind of look at that pattern, that full ET, reference ET, we're probably not using that for much of the year. Other crops, if I look at the crop coefficient pattern, this is a generalized pattern that we'll see for that KC number, and it starts out low. That crop coefficient is initial stage. You know, your seedling stage doesn't use much water. The plant's not very big. It doesn't have much surface area. Then through the vegetative growth stage, the crop is using more water. I get into the mid-season full canopy, usually flowering stage, bloom stage. I'm using more water. It can exceed the reference ET. And then as the crop matures, I start to see this decline in the crop coefficient. So when I start to put it together with the crop, for instance, this is a cotton crop water demand curve. I've got the emergence period. Doesn't use much water. I watch that water use pattern increase to pink bloom, and then it starts to drop off after that. So we're going to see this again. Average crop water use and water use efficiencies. You can see some different ranges here. Cotton, sorghum, and wheat in the Texas High Plains. We'll see these are sometimes or often grown dry land or rain fed. And so you see the wider range of crop water use. Corn and alfalfa, we're going to irrigate those mostly, and so they're using more water. Water use efficiency is also important. Cotton, for instance, at the top, 50 to 100 pounds of lint per acre inch of water. 50 used to be kind of the assumption that we would get, but we're seeing growers get higher water use efficiency. That's managing it well, careful management of limited irrigation and so on, which we'll get into later. But you see there's a lot of different estimates there, ranges of water use efficiency, and the combination of the yield and water use efficiency are both important. So we'll also consider that. For corn water use, corn is it's more sensitive to drought stress than cotton. It's most sensitive during 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after tassel. So we'll see that 100% ET replacement doesn't really provide significant yield advantage over about 80%, 75 to 80% ETC replacement. And that's based on research that was done at Eder and Halfway, Texas, Eder, Halfway, and Bushland, Texas. A more severe deficit irrigation, less than about 65 to 75% ET replacement, you're going to have a lower quality silage. You're going to have lower grain yield with those. So research, Qingwu Shua, credit to where it's due. Qingwu Shua published a really great publication on irrigated corn production and management in the Texas High Plains. It looks at, we'll call this crop production function, the yield of the crop, how it responds to water applied, or the seasonal ET. So how much water it got, more water, more yield, basically, right? But there are some changes in the slopes of the curves over the years. We've seen improvements in water use efficiency over time. So There's some notable improvements there over time. So I encourage you to look at that reference. I look at seasonal differences in crop water use for corn. So it varies season to season. I may have a 2003. 2003 was a hot, dry year. I may have cooler years. I may have warmer years. It changes also. The day-to-day crop water use varies with the weather. I could have a week of hot temperatures and then cooler. So you see a lot of variation, a lot of noise in that curve, right? So when I present these nice, clean curves, those don't really exist. So this is the real world. So additional factors to consider for corn crop water demand. Corn is, again, drought sensitive. Short season corn can use less water, not because the daily water demand is less, but because the duration of the irrigation season is less. So I can cut off, I can reduce the number of irrigation maybe at the end. Just because of the shorter season. Corn for silage, again, uses less water than full season grain corn, again, because of the shorter duration of the irrigation season. The daily water requirement is not less. We have some drought tolerance. It generally means that the crop is less affected by drought than conventional corn lines. Drought tolerant crops still require water, and they still can show reduced yield with crop water stress, but it's just they're less sensitive than other corn varieties. Planting date can also affect the pink water demands. We typically in the South Plains tend to get a really hot, dry time during late June. So if I can move my planting date a little later and get that peak atmospheric demand offset from our peak plant demand, then we reduce the overall water demand and we avoid that damaging heat stress during that critical pollination period. Additional factors, Dr. Winwei Xu, credit where it's due. He has developed some interesting corn lines, and he's exploring the possibility, what if corn could be grown as a high-value specialty crop? And he's got his high A corn, which is high anthocyanin, drought tolerant, heat tolerant, fumonisin resistant, short season sweet corn, conventional breeding practices. So it's non-GMO. It could be used for organic practices. He's done some animal feeding studies and food products, and I have personally helped taste the tortilla chips. So they're really good, but it's exciting. These bright colors are due to the anthocyanin, the high anthocyanin in the corn. So it's really neat. We've got some great breeders doing great work. Back to looking at different seasonal variations in crop water use of sorghum, wheat, cotton, and corn from Lubbock, Texas. This was from when we had the Texas High Plains ET network. You look at the different patterns. Obviously, wheat, since it's a winter wheat, the crop water demand is offset from the summer crops. Corn has those really high numbers there in the middle of the season. So we can look at the relative water requirement and the timing of those curves. Sorghum water demand. Sorghum's peak water use begins about initiation of the reproductive stage. It can be about 1/3 inch per day or more during hot, dry periods. Seasonal water demand for grain sorghum, 24 to 28 inches. It's a relatively drought tolerant crop. It has an extensive root system, and so it's suitable for deficit irrigation systems or even dry land or rain-fed production. Peanuts it's a different bird. You look at the general pattern of peanut crop water demand. It's obviously the highest and most sensitive is during the flowering period. Highest water use period is during flowering, but as the pegging period, you've got to have a deeper soil moisture for the roots, but you also have to have surface soil moisture for the pegging and for the pods to be able to take in water and nutrients from the soil. So peanuts, very different crop. Back to cotton again. We saw this pattern before. These are long-term averages that we took from the Texas High Plains ET network at Lubbock. You have a question? All right, so some research that Jim Berdovsky did at Halfway, Texas, looked at the relative periods. If I was going to limit irrigation, when is the highest return, or at what crop growth stages is the highest return for irrigation. So this is quite the involved study. I've got the citation there at the bottom of the page, but you can see that what he did was he pre-watered all of the different studies. He had many different studies. I just selected a few to show here, but really the highest return on the water was in that when he jumped from the mid-season higher water. So he limited irrigation early season, added more later, and he got the higher return compared to irrigating more heavily early season. Now, that is in a Pullman clay loam soil, which has a high water storing capacity. We'll talk about that later. But you can see there are differences in how sensitive the plant is to drought stress during different times. And so there's been a lot of work done on cotton irrigation at Halfway, Texas. We appreciate Jim's work. And there's a lot of great work in corn at Halfway as well as Bushland, Texas. Going back to what Jim's work, we kind of summarized the peak water, that peak bloom, the blue and green, that blue and darker green were the most sensitive or the highest return on the water and from his study. And then we see the drop off of sensitivity later in the season. Okay, so what do we take home from this? Well, cotton is one of the most drought tolerant and salt tolerant of our major agronomic crops grown in the Texas High Plains. Cotton can use a lot of water. So we get questions sometimes, why are you growing cotton if you're water limited? Well, cotton can use a lot of water, but can still produce a crop, although at a reduced yield on relatively little water. So we can grow at dry land in the High Plains. Our goal is to manage the irrigation to maximize the return on our input costs. So maximum yield may not be the highest input. We want to look at, or it may not be the most economically sound strategy. So we want to look at yield and quality. And sometimes there's a trade-off between yield and quality. If I push the crop too far, too late into the season, I may end up with a lot of immature bolls, and that can drop my quality a little bit. Cotton plant, what does it want? It wants sufficient water to prevent drought stress, but it doesn't want to be waterlogged. It doesn't want to have wet feet. It wants to have moist soil. And what I want to do too is manage the soil water conditions for extensive root development. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about soil water management. But for now, we just want, what is the plant wanting? It needs oxygen to its roots as well as water. So we don't want to waterlog it. Germination to squaring. Early season drought stress will cause square shedding, and that's going to affect your yield potential, especially if I'm up in the northern panhandle. I'm risking running short of season, so I want to push that crop early. I want to go ahead and irrigate it early, get that crop off to it, plant it early, irrigate it, get it off to a strong start, because I'm going to run out of season, or I'm likely to run out of season at the end if I get an early freeze. Newer recommendation, the highest consumptive water use occurs early flower to bulb development stages. So then we start balancing our water capacity, our irrigation capacity, our soil moisture, and our crop needs. So we'll come to that. That's going to come back around in subsequent weeks. With cotton, if I have excess water and nitrogen at the end of the season, now I'm going to start looking at having to hit it with some plant growth regulators to keep it harvestable, right? So I'm going to have to manage that plant. It wants to grow into a tree because it thinks it's a tree. So we're going to have to manage that. Drought stress, no matter what, is going to reduce our yield. It can bring earlier cut out, but it's going to limit our yield potential. So there's lots of considerations there. Preseason irrigation losses can be very high. Jim Brodowski, again, did some research on looking at rainfall storage, and others have said the same thing. If I start pre-watering too early or too heavy, half of the water could be gone before I put the seed in the ground. So I want to manage I need to understand the water holding capacity and make sure that I've got the water in the soil when the plant needs it. Start looking here, peak water, peak bloom. Again, I'm looking at some numbers here on the left, inches of water per day, the depth. Squaring, I'm using on average about 15/100ths of an inch per day. First bloom, about 1/4 of an inch per day. And peak bloom, about 1/3 of an inch per day on average, long-term average. I'll look at my irrigation system capacities. 1/4 inch for that, going back, whoops, quarter inch at first bloom, that's 4.5 gallons per minute per acre capacity. So that's why when we come back to soil water management in a couple of weeks, that's where that's going to make a difference. Is somehow I'm going to fall short with my irrigation system to meet the full crop water requirement. So I'm going to manage my soil to make up for that. Some references, some recommendations I'd like to make for you is Kevin Wagner's publication. It's from 2012, but there's some really good information in there and it points to some good references. So I'd like to encourage you to take a read. It's an easy read, lots of good graphics in there. I encourage you to read that from Texas Water Resources Institute. Crop evapotranspiration, the new FAO Irrigation and Drainage FAO Manual 56 talking about crop evapotranspiration. It has been published. It's straight off the press. It's available free from the FAO. And it's a deeper dive into crop evapotranspiration. It gets pretty sciencey, but if you really want to understand it, this is the reference to go to. Great research programs. I'm just going to throw some friends under the bus here. I didn't warn them, but Qingwu Shua at Bushland and Jordan Bell, Bushland, and now Canyon, Texas, since the AgriLife Center has moved to Canyon, really have some good publications that you should look up. Qingwu Xu, of course, is a crop stress physiology researcher, has done a lot of great, especially corn work. Jordan Bell works in every crop, and she's just really great. At the Lubbock Center, we have Ken Leger, our extension cotton specialist, does some really great work. And Wenwei Xu, rock star corn breeder, has those really neat, colorful corns and very knowledgeable about crop stress and genetics. USDA Agricultural Research Service at Bushland, Texas. This one, there's some really good publications from Steve Evick, Gary Marek, Paul Kalezi, Susan O'Shaughnessy, Terry Howell, and others. Encourage you to look at that. They have the large weighing lysimeters there, so there's a lot of good research published from their work, especially on crop water use and related research. They also have data available from USDA ARS, so I really appreciate them. The USDA Agricultural Research Service Cropping Systems Research Laboratory at Lubbock. These guys are really focused on plant stress and germplasm development, as well as soil health research. So there's some good work there. Also, USDA ARS, a lot of their publications are open source, therefore free. And finally, the USDA Agricultural Research Service funded Ogallala Aquifer Program, and that website is there, ogallala.tamu.edu. It's a collaboration of USDA ARS labs at Bushland and Lubbock, as well as Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension, Kansas State University, Texas Tech University, and West Texas A&M University. And a lot of their publications and reports are available, again, free at that website. So I encourage you to look at that. Really good stuff. A lot of stuff being done. That project has been ongoing since 2003, so there's a lot of good work over time. Some of the folks have retired, but their work is, their research is still relevant to us. I'll open for questions. I'll stop, and maybe Christy's got some questions for us or some corrections. And I'll welcome anyone to jump in and correct us or ask. Thank you.
There are no questions currently in the chat box, but feel free to put them in or unmute yourself and let's have a great discussion.
I'll stop sharing so I can see people.
It's a recording.
Oh.
I'm just required to listen to it.
Oh.
It takes attendance.
We hear you, Mark. Christy is working on CEUs also, and if anyone is self-certified, we'll provide documentation that you need for that. She's also, what do you have on the CEUs, Christy? I welcome your input.
So if somebody is interested in CEUs, I can get those for you. We are also trying to figure out the TCEQ. So if anybody has any insight with TCEQ and how to get those, CEUs, I would definitely take some recommendations on that. But I do know that if you are CCA, you can also self-certify, and I can provide any kind of documentation for that you need.
There's a question from Calvin. Long-term experience, common mistakes they make in water management. Oh, goodness. Where do we start, right? I think, when I first got here, I would hear stories about don't water till later in the season because, you wanted to encourage the plants to go looking for water. Plants aren't that smart. uh, they don't want to be waterlogged, but roots won't grow in dry soil either. So we need to understand the soil, understand the rooting depth. I think that's really important. Also, I've been here way too long, I guess, but a long time ago, there would be reports encouraging growers to fill the root zone all the way to fill capacity before planting. And what happens is, and Jim Brodowski's research showed this, is that we're losing half or more of that irrigation water before we put seed in the ground. Now, that was based on a study he did 3 years in a row, starting 5 weeks prior to plant. And this is with low elevation spray application, low energy precision application. So LISA, LIPA, and subsurface drip irrigation. And all of those were half or more of the water was missing by the time they planted. So that's, we want to start matching our applications closer to when the plant needs it. And I know there are people on here who can correct me. Other mistakes? Guilt watering is another one where they would irrigate a more sensitive crop and then we feel bad. So after we harvest the corn, when we throw a bunch of water on the cotton after it really needs it, just because we feel guilty. So that's not really helpful either.
So Dr. Porter, when that you said that people shouldn't pre-water a whole lot, but if they just really want to pre-water, what is a good, kind of what's good to tell them? Like, should they pre-water? How much should they pre-water?
Obviously it matters. It depends on what the soil condition is. I mean, if I'm dry and if I dry plant, I'm praying for rain, So I'll look at the outlook. Okay, is my soil, is it already wet? Is it dry after the last season? I need planting moisture, or I need something to get the crop up. I also want to get, I look at the weather outlook. Are they predicting rain or not? I mean, there's lots of those things. Is it going to be hot and dry? Do I have an open planting time? Let's go. And sometimes I just have to water to get the crop up, so I hesitate to say don't pre-water. I think filling it down to 8 feet to fill capacity might be a little bit overkill. So anyone can correct me. Water use efficiencies, the question, ballpark water use efficiencies on drip, well-managed LIPA, LISA, sprinkler, and even row water. Wow, that's a good question. And we'll touch out on it later, but I see that graphic a lot of times. There's a chart that says, LIPA is 95% efficient and LISA is 90% efficient. I hate that chart because it depends on how you manage it, right? Micro irrigation can be easily upwards of 90%, 95% efficient if I manage it well. But I can also manage it poorly and get poor results, where the water's just, I over apply and the water's just going out the bottom of the root zone. Well-managed LIPA and LISA, obviously I want to look at my soil. A coarser soil like a sand can't hold as much water as a a clay loam soil, for instance. And if I have a high slope, I'm likely to have runoff. So I have to really look at a case by case on how it's managed. I can get upwards of 90% efficiency with micro irrigation, LIPA, Lisa. Lisa is the same as sprinkler. If I look at higher pressure sprinkler systems, generally I'm going to assume in the high plains a higher evaporation loss, just because the droplets are small, and if I shoot water up in the air, I'm going to have some of that. I'm turning my irrigation system into an evaporative cooler. But again, managing it well, I can get a higher water use efficiency. Even row water, even surface irrigation, if I manage it well, I can do 80+% efficiency, maybe 90% efficiency. Again, depends on how I manage it.
Any other questions? Feel
I
free
don't
to
know.
unmute or to put them in the chat.
I don't know. I don't know if she's on the call, but Jordan Bell has a really good corn irrigation fact sheet coming out soon. I'm excited to see that. Chingwu Shua has some really good research. He and Thomas Mark have done some really great irrigation research with corn crop production functions. I really encourage you to look at that. The USDA ARS labs, I was having trouble finding some things on they've changed websites. They're getting harder to navigate, but there's some really good published information from USDA ARS as well. Here's a good question. If you were a cotton farmer in the South Plains, which one of two things would I do specifically for cotton water management? One, pray for rain. I would really want to make sure that I need to understand my soil and my plant. Those are things. I think we have a lot of tools available, technologies available to us, but if I don't understand what they're telling me, for instance, evapotranspiration or soil moisture monitoring, really understand how the crop uses the water and when it uses the water, so I can match those better. I'm assuming the question is coming from someone who knows that most of our irrigation systems, we're capacity limited. Most of us don't have enough water to fully irrigate our crop. And so with cotton, I'm looking at, in the South Plains, making sure I have water available at that flowering to boll development stage, without too much stress early in the season. If I'm in the northern panhandle, I'm gonna push that crop early. I've got to have those early bolls, and I've got to retain those early bolls to get the crop.
I know we didn't talk much about soil, but when you say knowing your soil, are you talking about using those technologies like web soil survey, or what else is there out there that we could use?
Web soil survey is a great one. Thank you, Christy. Also, just gravimetric soil moisture monitoring, just the feel method, or I can put in soil sensors, and there are a lot of different types of soil sensors, whether it's the electrical resistance, or if I have electrical conductance, or the TDRs, time domain reflectometry. They're different. They all kind of are telling me the same thing, but I need to understand how to interpret that information. And Christy has some studies, right? Looking at some of that. And so we're going to be looking at some of that later. I think in some of our workshops that we're planning later, we'd like to sit down with growers and look at the soil maps, look at the information that those sensors are telling us, and just talk about how we're going to interpret those. Going to lean on Christy really hard. I'm looking forward to seeing that work. And our agronomists and ag engineers in AgriLife and USDA are not safe, we're likely to call you.
We still have a few minutes for questions if y'all would like to ask them, or if you have a comment, or I know that some of y'all are not from the High Plains area, so feel free to jump in and ask us something that's more specific to your area, and we can see if we can answer that for you.
We're going to play Stump the Extension People. Is that what we're going to play? Here's someone that has a farmer that has 3 wells tied together and still pumps only 80 gallons per minute. Half pivot. Is it worth it to keep irrigating? Depends on what you're growing. Right. 80 gallons per minute is not much water. Half pivot. I don't know. Is that a quarter miler? Is that when you start looking at really lower irrigation capacities, that's where 60 acres on a half pivot. So that's not even 2 gallons per minute per acre. That's when timing is everything. That's in those really low capacities. That's where your micro irrigation, your drip irrigation starts to look more advantageous, although it's more expensive as far as the hardware, the installation, the capital investment. When you start looking at those lower capacities, that's when you're scaling your irrigation system to the water you have, or you're scaling your planting acres to the water you have. You might be better off looking at a crop that you can grow dry land in rotation with a smaller acre of something that's higher value that requires water. So managing, and you see a lot of split pivots in the High Plains. You see a lot of people irrigating only a portion of their pivot. So you see a lot of that, and that's why. Or with a really low capacity, that's where you see specialty crops, high value crops, your wine grape production. A lot of that's tied to the lower capacity, but they want to get a higher return for that. That's part of the argument that Dr. Shu is making for his specialty corn. Could I get a higher value, a higher market value for corn I produce on a smaller acre if I have a special corn that has a special purpose? And so that's part of why he's doing what he's doing. Is it's a higher nutrient content that should have a higher value, and therefore I could just irrigate. Maybe 30 acres would make more sense, or 20 acres would make more sense in that case. It depends. Do appreciate the questions. These are very good questions. I should throw Christy under the bus and make her answer. I should be quiet and let her answer all the questions. I'd keep talking. Here's one from NRCS. Thank you. Has there been much research done on peak use of various grass species? If so, where? That's a good one. Christy, you're nodding. That's why.
That's a great question. I thank you for that question. Maybe that is something that we should be looking into a little bit more, since that feels kind of where we're going in this area.
I know that at Bushland, they do have some grass that they're studying there right at the Bushland Research Station. Dallas and Hayden, I don't know where you're based. Dallas Center has a turf grass specialist and a research program where they are looking at different irrigation rates on different grasses. I don't know what all varieties that they have, but they do have quite a few, and including some of the zoysias and some of those specialty, and some of their grass varieties they're testing at Bushland. So it might be worth looking at there. I think that's the main base of the turf irrigation research in Texas, or that's where a lot of it is at the Dallas Center. As far as pasture grasses, that's harder. I've struggled to find good research on pasture water use. Now, some of the remote sensing ET studies, there's probably more on that with the open ET and with some of the other, I'll say, the Bowen ratios or the scintillometry, some of those more indirects in there. Most of those are going to be out of state. That's not a problem, but we don't have as much on the direct measurements of those pasture crops. I've looked.
We will have a new water limited forage specialist position in Canyon. And so maybe this is something that they will be able to bring in some information on once they get officially hired.
Yeah. Looking forward to that. We do need good forages, and there's a big demand for that. So I'm excited about that new position. And if anybody else has better information on that, please chime in. Crop selection is a big part of what the regional water planning the regional water planning groups and the Texas Water Development Board State Water Plan crop selection is a big part of the planned strategies for as we look at water shortfalls later on. I guess forecasted water shortfalls, how are we going to deal with it? And the water planning requires looking at strategies. Irrigation strategies, crop selection strategies are all part of those, all included in those reports. And so the movement from corn to cotton up in the Texas Panhandle is part of that. It's response to limited water. But then we have competing interests. We do need the forages for our dairies and for our feedlots. We've got a really important livestock feeding and dairy industry in the state, especially in the Texas High Plains. And so we need those crops to support those. So lots of decisions to be made. Well, Christy, we've put them all to sleep. So, and you've got Christy's email and mine. You can contact us anytime. If there are other subjects that you would like to address in this series, we'd be glad to hear from you. Good papers, good studies that you're aware of, we'd like to know about them. And I'll keep pushing out, trying to make good recommendations for further reading like I did this time. I'd like to do that for every session. Christy's got some really great work, and she's working with some really good production, some farmers. Oh, good. Thank you, Christy. She's putting those links in the chat. And we can also send those out in the email list too, about those sources. Just there's a lot of good stuff out there that we're not able to touch. We're not going to teach a whole plant physiology class in this session, but we would like for you to know where we go when we need answers. We thank you for your time and your interest, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Thank y'all so much for joining in. I will send out a link for the recording and then also for these resources that she shared today. Thank y'all so much.
Thanks, y'all.